Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Cosmic Corner, only on Faith Unaltered. Man, it is a good day. It's a good Friday. I'm safely home and had a really crazy, hazardous day at work, and I'm blessed to be upright and without injury and have all my fingers. So I'm already blessed to be here. But in addition to that, I have four fantastic guests here. Most of them you've seen before, but one, if you watched Faith Unaltered, you might have noticed his face before, but he's a first time on Cosmic Corner. So I'll introduce you first. Michael Halcomb, Dr. Michael Halcomb. Welcome.
Yeah, hey, it's good to be here. Michael's fine. I'm very glad you have all your fingers still as well. So, yeah, that's great news.
Right on. And also, again, we have Spencer Owen, our wonderful counselor.
Got to be careful with that one.
our mediocre counselor.
There we go. I'll take that if it brings some humility.
Right on. And Travis Worth, our resident philosopher. What's going on? Welcome back, bro.
Hey, good to be back. It's been a while, so I'm looking forward to this. Yeah, and this topic just it really piqued my interest. I was like, man, I would love to get in on this one. So yeah, looking forward to this one.
I'm glad you're here, man. And
Thank you.
also have with us my twin, who I have since last time I was on Cosmic Corner met in person, and what a crazy blessing that was.
That was
Welcome.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
That was
right
an awesome
on.
meeting, man.
It was. I am still it's still imprinted in my mind, and I'm more than blessed. But we definitely have to do it again.
Yeah.
They got me the
Wait,
itch.
hold on, you guys are you guys actually twins? Because you've got me.
No.
No,
No, we're not actually twins. It's just convenient that he's Irish cream and red bearded as well. So
They literally could be though.
Man, you could have fooled me for sure.
well, see, that's why I call him that. It's it could have fooled me too if I didn't know better. If I was adopted, I'd have been like, hey.
Wow. All right.
But yeah, no, we're not actually twins, and we met for the first time just a few weeks ago, and so it was a huge treat and quite.
No, I actually think you guys are twins. Like, I think we should spend the episode exploring that.
That would be cool. Let's get a paternity. We're probably
everything.
related in some capacity. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that meeting was awesome. Like I've said before, never meet your heroes, but this was awesome. So,
Oh, nice.
That was really, really cool. But that got the itch on me to meet the rest of the guys, and so now I have a bucket list for sure. But tonight, what we're going to be discussing, as you saw on the overlay, that image that I put up for the thumbnail, we're going to be talking about identity again, but in relation to ritual and to beauty. And in the modern world, I think that we're far more familiar with one than the other. We've become obsessed with beautiful things, or at least our conceptions of what we think we should be beautiful things. And yet we've become, in some sense, as a culture, historically speaking, let's say in the modern day, very drab and unbeautiful with our art, with our architecture, with things that are around us on a daily basis. Even when I was a kid, and this is a joke, but it was almost depressing. There was a picture that I saw scrolling through Facebook the other day, two contrasted images, and they were both the building of a McDonald's in the same location, but one was in the early 90s and one was last year. And it was so desperate to see the contrast between the colors, the shapes, the size, just the welcomingness, even to a child, let alone to an adult. It's very playful, very welcoming. And then the next image is just a gray box. And it's so weird that we do this to everything. Like, we do this to everything. And I'm not really entirely sure that it's something that everybody is doing consciously. But as somebody who works in construction, I've seen houses that I worked as the electrician, installing every single wire that was in this place, every single light that was in this place. And without any exaggeration, it was literally a box. It was a big rectangle. Everything in the building was rectangle. The entire first floor was made of cinder blocks, which are all rectangles. It was the most boring thing I had ever seen in my life. And it was a massive house, and it cost them lots and lots of money. They had it designed this way, but it was just so ugly. You know what I mean? It's like all the time spent, all of the intent, all of the effort to find something that's still less than what people were doing even a few hundred years ago. You know what I mean? With their bare hands, without any of the tools and technology and timelines that we have now. And it's insane the direction that we've gone. And kind of in response to that, I wanted to tie in how that affects what we mean by identity, especially in the individual and corporate levels, because there's a lot that goes on between me as a person and us, right? And so there's a lot of identity in us, just as much, if not more so, than there's identity in the me, the I, the you, the individual, right? And so to kind of play with the idea and see what we can come up with as far as why ritual, let's say, has such a grasp on what it means to be human, I think. And it's not something that we're really familiar with as much on the, normal day-to-day modernity that we live in now. But ultimately, the same thing that we've come to call our hangups or our habits are shorthand for what people would have understood to be ritualistic behavior, right? And we do this, oftentimes we only notice the negative rituals that we have, those bad habits, those things that we don't, especially as Christians, we're convicted by those things that you do on a habitual basis that you're like, it doesn't even work. Like, it's not good. I don't want it anymore. Or maybe it's even harmful to me, but I just can't seem to not do it. It's almost built into me in some sense. It's become habitual, right? And that's because there's an action pattern, and it's a pattern of action is what that literally means, that you attach to the thing that make it very, very difficult to avoid, very easy to move through subconsciously and simply go through the motions. A lot of people are fearful that their religious walk can become something that is like that. And I kind of want to push back and challenge the idea that ritual in that context is always a bad thing at all. So that's kind of the groundwork in my head. What I've been mulling over the last couple of weeks is just that idea. And so I wanted to toss this out and see what we can make of it. If we can make, something useful. I am kind of curious, because I know that Travis had something that he has basically prepared a short thing to kind of like bring some of the early church texture to this idea and what it means to have a ritual world, like the world kind of made of this kind of habitual patterning and how we participate in it. And so if you want to take that off, Travis, that would be really cool.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of just want to lay out a brief bullet point summary of what Saint Maximus the Confessor, used by way of a cosmic liturgy. And so Saint Maximus the Confessor, he was a really important early church father. He is probably best known for his work on the two natures of Christ, the two wills of Christ. But he was a 6th century Christian philosopher and monk. And he viewed liturgical rites as reflections of the cosmic order, suggesting that ritual is a fundamental and universal aspect of creation. For Maximus, every part of creation participates in the divine liturgy, making ritual a universal human experience that connects the material to the divine. He viewed the human as a microcosm. His concept of humans as microcosms means that human nature inherently involves participating in and mirroring larger cosmic rituals. He also applied sort of an aesthetic theology, and where Maximus emphasized the beauty and harmony present in the divine order and liturgical acts. He believed that beautiful rituals reflect and participate in divine beauty, making them fitting expressions of profound spiritual truths. And this really aligns with the idea that the most important rituals are often the most beautiful and meaningful. In St. Maximus's theology, theosis, or the journey towards union with God, is marked by significant sacramental moments that guide the believer's spiritual transformation. His writings often discuss spiritual progress in stages, sort of akin to rites of passage, where each stage is a step closer to achieving a deeper union with God. He also marks rituals as sort of identity markers. Maximus viewed baptism as a critical initial rite of passage for Christians, marking their new identity in Christ. For him, baptism symbolizes the death and resurrection of Christ, initiating or integrating the baptized into the body of Christ and marking a profound spiritual identity shift. He connects the use of water in baptism to both purification and new birth, indicating a transformative re-identification of the believer. The Eucharist is seen as the participation in the divine nature through the bread and wine. For Maximus, this ritual is an ongoing identity marker, reminding believers of their continual transformation and union with Christ. By partaking in the Eucharist, Christians collectively affirm and express their identity in the body of Christ. This reflects St. Maximus' view that the Eucharist unites the participants not only with God, but with each other in a significant and transformative communal identity. For St. Maximus, the person is a holistic union of body, soul, and spirit, integrated into a divine purpose. He taught that true identity is reached when the nous, which is the highest part of the spiritual intellect, is illuminated by divine grace, thus enabling a direct experiential knowledge of God. This illumination harmonizes the entire person, aligning bodily actions, emotional life, and spiritual aspirations with the divine logos, thereby actualizing their full potential and divine calling. So in a nutshell, St. Maximus the Confessor's concept of the cosmic liturgy envisions the entire cosmos as participating in a divine symphony of worship and harmony, where each element of creation, all the way from galaxies to grains of sand, plays a purposeful role. Humans, as microcosms, uniquely encapsulate both the material and the spiritual dimensions, serving as priests who mediate and elevate creation through liturgical acts. This cosmic liturgy underscores the universality and beauty of ritual, portraying it as unifying language that actually transcends cultures and time. And by participating in sacraments like baptism and the Eucharist, Christians not only affirm their individual identity, but also connect to this grand cosmic order, reflecting divine beauty and purpose through their worship. And we reach our true being when we are in communion with God and one another in this Eucharistic ontology. And we have the freedom to either choose to embrace this telos or to reject it for our own selfish ends. And God has endowed us with that freedom to choose. And so, yeah, that's basically going to be just a bird's eye view of St. Maximus the Confessor's idea of a cosmic liturgy.
And God said that it was very good. That's all that I could think of the entire time you read that is, and God said it was good. And God saw that it was good. And then it was very good. And it's like man being the pinnacle to help hold dominion over the creation and be God's presence in his temple. And that's all right. Of Genesis 1 through just Genesis 1 through the beginning of chapter 3 and the ushering in, to think about what it would mean for the first microcosm to really fall away from God. I think you just blew a hole in this 3 for me.
And Josh, the thing is, this also kind of ties into the Eastern view of is through purification of the nous. It's sort of like when our nous, which is our spiritual intellect, when that's purified, we come to see the world in a different way. And it's instead of seeing the world as we once did, it now opens up before our eyes, and we see this grand cosmic liturgy unfolding before us when our nous is illuminated by God's grace. And so, that I really resonate with that pretty deeply.
Right on. Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you for that. I'm glad you read that verse. That was really great. For me, it kind of like, especially in the way that we talk about uniting with one another in some, unseen mystical sort of way while we're all in the same place at the same time doing the same thing. The thing that I think about is every night when I have my family sit down at the table and there's no screens at the dinner table, and my children take turns praying for the food. And we do this every night, like exactly the same every night, not at the same time necessarily as much as I would like, but every night at least. we are sitting, and we don't really eat anywhere else other than at the table. And it's at the table with no screens that we have nothing but each other and what we're doing together at the same time for the same reason. And that's the time when that unity as a family, that unseen bond that has very little to do with biology, is making itself really obvious, and you're participating in it in the exact same way in the private home as you are in a religious setting necessarily, right? And so I kind of see, like, immediately in my head, I get this picture of the everydayness of it being just as divine in some sense. You know what I mean?
When I, as a counselor, work with couples, because I do a lot of marriage and family counseling, one of the things
Yeah.
I talk with them about is like creating a relational culture, trying to work as a and place a priority on building these kinds of like inside jokes, like shared history, a lot of times people will have their own kind of shorthand language, like they can say a certain word and just everybody in the family knows what that word means or knows what that phrase means.
Yeah.
But then also, and I mean, that goes in both directions. That's like, both a positive culture building moment, and it's also a negative culture building moment, in some cases, where there's things like, unwritten rules within the family of like, these are the things we don't say, these are the things we don't talk about, these are the things we don't do, this is in this family we don't cry, in this family we don't, whatever. And all of those are embodied ritual activities because they happen over and over and over, but not just with repetition, but they have that kind of noetic component. They do more than just like affect our body. They affect, kind of like what you were saying, Travis, with St. Maximus. Like it creates this unification of body, soul, and spirit together.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a real unification, and it's like, it's what the early fathers thought, is that that's what makes the we as persons are holistic, that they're that, because they really were speaking out against the sort of Platonic thought that the body is bad and it's only the spirit's good. A lot of people just like label the fathers as Platonists, but it's really a lot more nuanced than that. They spoke out against a lot of the Platonic assumptions, and so they really had very nuanced views with that, and they were really big on the physical, the spiritual, and the physical and the spiritual being a unified whole that makes up the person, and the spiritual affects the physical and vice versa. So that's spot on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that I've seen happen in those relational contexts, or like marriage and family situations, is that by either creating new rituals that build connection, that build affection, that build trust, those kinds of things. By doing those things, it, I mean, quite literally changes the spirit of the family, of the community, that little kind of micro community. And so it's more than just like a conceptual thing, like off in the ether, like in, like Platonic world. Like it's a real practical daily life thing, in my experience.
I like that. I like how you said that.
It's not something that you store away in fantasy land. It's something that you're actually doing. And it's cool. This is one of those things where I feel like, like I said, it's just like, it's the everydayness of something that actually points out how like deeply meaningful the experience of it actually is. And we take it for granted because it's the water that we're swimming in. And we don't notice that, how like this is the thing until there's the void of its absence. And then we feel the angst that, distance makes the heart grow fonder and so forth, like that emptiness where something that was expected is now not, and then you can feel its lack, and then that is now the meaning, is the lack. You know what I mean? Because the participation isn't there anymore. There's just the whole. You know what I mean? Like when I went to, and this is totally sappy of me for me to say, but I went to Illinois for my cousin who was getting married because he wanted me to officiate his wedding, and I was like, yeah. And so I went to Illinois to do that, and I was super excited. I got there, and the first night was so busy that I didn't notice that I was so tired. I went to bed and I just fell asleep. The next day, we had a really restful day because we didn't really do much. Kind of hung out at his house and did some crafts to prepare for the wedding or something, but didn't really do much. And I had a lot of energy at the end of the day, and I went to go sleep and was like, God, this sucks. Like, man, this sucks. Everything is wrong right now. And I'm laying in a bed. It's quiet. I can fall asleep, but like, no, I can't fall asleep right now. I didn't sleep at all that night. I barely slept the next night. It took me like 3 nights to finally be tired enough to actually go back to sleep because I didn't have what I normally had. I didn't get to hug my kids. I didn't have my wife. There was like, the bed was smaller. Like, the room was definitely not mine. The smells in the house weren't the same. Like, everything about the setting was just not there. And yet I was in a comfortable place. I was in a safe place. I was with my family. I was having a great time. I wasn't sad or anything. It just wasn't it. It was just the hole. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, that's where the meaning is. That's where the sap is in the things that you do all the time. The little things that amount to all of the big things that you mean by like my life, like where I am now. I say that my family is my life. You know, we say our job is my job is my life. My work is my life. You know, church is my life. Like, what we mean by that is, this is the water I have come to swim in. You know what I mean? That's what that is, those things that we attach the deepest experience of that meaning to, those things we naturally ritualize. And that's why they become background to us, I think.
Well, and to me, Josh, that's sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Spencer. Yeah.
I was just going to say that's kind of one of the two defining features that distinguish between ritual and repetition, is that like a repetition is something, you know, like brushing your teeth, for example, that you just don't really invest a lot of meaning in. It just kind of is something you do. It becomes a habit. It's
right.
Now, I'm not saying that doesn't have a noetic component. It certainly does on some level, and it certainly can. Like, there are many, many people I know who make a ritual out of very mundane, ordinary things. But I think that what really kind of distinguishes between routine and ritual is that element of like intentionality, like a specific thing that is intentionally done to get an intentional outcome. Ritual doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah,
right.
I've got a pretty good example that I think anybody that's listening, at least in the US, will understand what David's saying about the gap and the intentionality behind it. And so granted, I'm not picking a side on this, but I'm just want to point out something. When people decided to start kneeling for the national anthem, that is one of those things where you saw the gap and separation between people that had continued in this ritual and a group of people. Everything's great. They stand, they take their hat off, whatever it may be, put their hand over their heart. And then you have this other group that's kneeling, and you feel the gap, that they're not at the table anymore, that something's missing, right? And then whatever the commentary back and forth, the point of the people that were kneeling was, hey, we're not actually getting a seat at the table, or we're getting the worst seat at the table. Hey, if we're supposed to be one unified whole, pay attention. So you have that serious meaning built into it, and the whole nation felt the gap when that started happening.
Oh yeah.
So.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sure. I was just gonna piggyback on. I thought it was interesting, Spencer, you brought up brushing your teeth, because I think that that can be a repetition thing, but I think it's also an interesting. It could be a ritual too. I think of like the couple who brushes their teeth together before bed at night, something like that. But also that intersects with beauty. You're literally beautifying yourself, your teeth, you're cleaning your teeth, you're cleaning your mouth, your breath, that kind of thing. So that's an interesting intersection of beauty and ritual. But I was going to say, like a few years ago, I was teaching a class at local Christian university here, and it was on miracles. And I had done this really extensive study prior to like in-depth statistical analysis. So I went through the entire Old Testament and looked at every single verse where there was something miraculous or related to the miraculous. And I discovered that it was less than, I think, 5% of the entire Old Testament, doing like a statistical analysis like that, was dealing with the miraculous. And then when you get to the New Testament, which is shorter, I think it was like 4 to 5%, which, you know, the whole of Scripture, then it becomes about 95% of Scripture is just dealing with the mundane, right? Like going to the well to get water, which was a sort of ritual thing. Like, I don't know, washing a kid's hair, you know, like these daily things. And I think a loud message that we often miss from Scripture, because we're often so taken up by and like caught up in like the miraculous, is that, look, 95% of this thing is like God dealing in the mundane, baking bread, you know, getting water. And as you were touching on there, Josh, like I think we would do really well to, you know, acknowledge that at the very least, but, you know, live into that. In fact, like these daily things, you know, are really important to God. And you know, he's often shows up most in those. Like, you know, I think I went onto a website yesterday, and as soon as I did, I got this pop-up message. You know, I hate those things, but and I had the thought, like, you know, as I like look around, like, you know, this tree, this cloud, like this, my wife, like this kid, and like those are like, it's like God's at work constantly sending us pop-up messages like, hey, I'm right here. I'm in this person. I'm right here. You're looking at the beauty of this tree. That's all me. Like the sunset, all me. Like, and God's like relentlessly sending us pop-up messages throughout our day. But yeah, I think he's just there in the mundane. We just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
I really like how you said that. It's like, if you think about some of the most profound divine truths that God has revealed to us, have been of the mundane, of things like planting seeds, you know, and stuff like that. And even some of the things, you know, even the simple, beautiful things, you know, we think, you know, we're talking about rituals and how they reflect the divine. Well, a lot of these, you know, the small, beautiful things, they are sort of a reflection of the divine beauty. And so, yeah, I really like how you sort of combine that together like that. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That yes, like even something like brushing your teeth can be a ritual. And I know I'm thinking of specifically how there are, both in the Jewish tradition as well as in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, there are tons of different prayers that are recited for like everyday things, like leaving your house, coming and going, going on traveling. There's actually even one called the Asher Yatzar that is said when you go to the restroom. And so there's literally like one of these, there are ways to ritualize or to sacralize like every single day activities. But it's still, so it seems to me like the question of ritual isn't a matter of what, but it's a matter of why. Like, why are you doing it? And that's where I think, you know, Paul in Colossians 3:17 says, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father. So it's the same sort of thing there, that, you know, literally anything can be a ritual as long as it's done for God with or with that noetic purpose. I'm trying to broaden, and then we can shrink down to our context.
Well, to Troy's example too about kneeling, right? And some are kneeling, some are not, some are actively refusing to kneel, right? So there's this like gap, and that may expose like how, I guess, the nation, if we want to talk that corporately, has maybe drifted from ritual. And then you see a guy like Jordan Peterson burst onto the scene, right? And he writes a book like 12 Rules, 12 Rules for Living or something like that. And, you know, what he's doing essentially is offering 12 rituals, to engage in, to order, especially he's targeting like men, right? Like young men and adult males who seem to be aimless, wandering aimlessly. And he's saying, hey, stop. Here are 12 rituals to order your life by. Right. And that seems to be turning back to the other direction. You have a whole generation that's not kneeling, but they are searching for ritual. And he just happens to be one of the louder voices at the moment saying, well, here's 12 I can give you.
Right. I actually have I have both the his first and second book on 12 rules on my shelf, and I can tell you, yeah, it's quite literally, here's how to be religious without joining a religion,
Right.
basically, right?
Mm.
And it's like awakening. And I think the response that you just pointed out to books like that is actually a tell that society is kind of stuck in this weird limbo where we know we need it, but we make ourselves adverse to it. You know what I mean? Like there's this resistance. And I know that there's resistance even within churches to other different churches doing rituals differently, right? Like even within Christianity, are all the different sectarian divides that happen in virtually every other kind of religion, like Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and everything else. It's like a weird thing that happens.
Even within the same denomination. So this is interesting. I feel like I'm talking a lot. I don't mean to hog the mic, but so I'm a full-time pastor, and our congregation meets in a high school cafeteria. Okay. Been that way for like 25 years. I haven't been the pastor there 25 years, but so we've been meeting in this high school cafeteria. During COVID, we got booted, and then about a month and a half ago, I got a call from the vice principal, or a text message actually, and he's saying, "Hey, in 2 days, like that'll have to be your last Sunday because we're replacing the roof on the cafeteria starting Sunday or Monday." He says you have to find somewhere to meet for the rest of the summer. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you gave me a 2-day notice. So through a bunch of like things that happened, we end up meeting with another Nazarene congregation on the island. I live in Oahu, Hawaii. So, and for the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've been doing a blended service with another Nazarene church. So it's 2 Nazarene congregations coming together, and the liturgy that we tend to follow is very different from the liturgy that they follow. And trying to do a blended liturgy, oh man, it's bumpy. It's really bumpy, and I think maybe wouldn't be as bumpy outside of Protestantism, but it's bumpy, a little bit. Not that that's a bad thing; it's forcing some people to stretch. But yeah, the rituals that each group is used to, now we're trying to blend some of that, and it makes it creates a little bit of an atmosphere of discomfort, but that's okay. I think.
It's a perfect time to actually discuss ritual, because I don't want to speak for everything, but generalized in the Western world, our ritual is being adverse to ritual. We don't realize you can't get away from it. Everything that we do is ritualized in some way, shape, or form. And so when you have this situation, it's a perfect time to go, hey, you actually were doing this ritual because you got used to it and it had meaning to you, and you've been coming to this church. Hey, we've got another church that does it this way through this means, and we don't call it ritual. We don't call it religion, but that's what it is because it's deep and meaningful. Now we just mix these 2 groups together that have 2 different ritual habits, 2 different, not necessarily different meanings attached to those habits, but the habits are different that are attached to the same meaning. And now you're going, oh, this is a lot more rough. This would be a perfect time to actually have that conversation and going, you can't escape ritual. You're going to have it. And that's one of the comments that I made on the chat, is that when you reject the holy, and all you're left with is the mundane, the rituals will become profane. And that's the problem, is that it will always tend towards, if I don't have holy images that I can venerate, I will venerate unholy images. What do you think the pornographic industry is, right? So you have this, you just can't escape ritual. You are going to be involved in a ritual. Now it's whether or not you can see the holy and see, just like what Travis talked about, this the mundane is where God is found, and that those little things, the rituals of washing that you find in the Old Testament, the little things here and there, 95% of scriptures, like you said, Michael, are mundane. Why? Because in those mundane, as you do it ritually, as you find the meaning and pray, like Spencer addressed, every little mundane thing can now be something made holy. And I think that's an incredible movement when you recognize that ritual is not always an unhealthy thing, and you can't get away from it.
Well, and I mean, a lot of times we have these kind of ingrained cultural values. I'm so glad you pointed that out, Troy, just because like when you were telling that story, Michael, I was hearing you talk about how your two Protestant congregations, which ordinarily Protestant would be anti-ritual, like they would be the most in favor theoretically with just kind of going as the Spirit moves you, and you just if you feel it, you just do it. And I'm caricaturing. I'm fully aware, but so that just illustrates your point, Troy, that we all do it, whether we are aware of it or not. But I have noticed that like in the kind of modern American highly Protestant context in which at least I live, and I think and all of us have at least a significant foot in, we tend to like really highly value like spontaneity and novelty. Part of that is just kind of like a feature of like consumer culture. There was a really good book I read recently by Byung-Chul Han called The Disappearance of Ritual. And it talks in there and it kind of frames it all in this context of like how we've gone from a ritual culture, like most societies across time and space, to with the advent of capitalism, a consumer culture, and how like that's what we do now. And like the rituals we have are designed for that purpose, for consumption. And specifically, like when we're consuming, we tend to like we get bored easily. And so what we like to do is we always demand spontaneity, we demand novelty, we demand something to kind of shake us up or shock us in some way. And that's almost like a cultural value that we have built in. So it really creates a certain spirit that then organizes, animates, and guides us in a certain way. So
I wonder if people are not as welcoming of or appreciative of or valuing of spontaneity as they really think they are. I think a lot of people like to think that they place a high premium on spontaneity, but when you get down to it, there's still a lot of ritual there.
Well, brushing your teeth is a great example. Like most of us have like a ritual or at least a routine, I should say, of brushing our teeth. And one of the kind of key features of that tells you if there's something else behind it is to like shake it up a little bit. Like instead of brushing top to bottom, start brushing bottom to top. Start brushing with your other hand. Start, brushing in a different location.
Feels weird.
Use a different toothbrush. Use a different toothpaste. Like and again, I'm being kind of facetious because it's a very simplistic level, but the simplistic becomes the bigger. So yes,
it does seem universal to humans though, these rituals, for either good or bad.
Speaking of which, Dane, I see Dane commenting, and Dane's number one. Dale, Real Seekers, commented and asked a really great question that is going to, I think, help clarify.
Okay.
He says, "Hi, everyone. Ritual can reflect God's ordered design, but at times it can be harmful spiritually and mentally. What differentiates good versus bad rituals?" And he added, "On the mental front, I know Spencer is a psychologist or something. What about people who become obsessed or need ritual or else they can't function, etc., as in mental disorders?"
Are we doing these like one at a time, or?
I think he's asking it kind of holistically, but it was relevant to how you pointed out the good and bad ritual.
Oh, okay,
it's universal, and we have good and bad rituals. So I think he's asking, where are the boundaries?
Yeah, and I think that's a very valuable kind of truth-seeking question. In fact, this is actually one, talking about Saint Maximus the Confessor. This is one that he came up with. It's so a good ritual is one that aligns with the divine will and facilitates participation in theosis, that moves us because God has a divine will or an intention for everything. It's what moves us along towards that divine intention that God has in store for us. Whereas bad rituals are going to be what detract us from that telos that God has for us, in a very simplistic sort of way. But it's, going against the grain of God's intentions, or participating in going with Him, like synergistically.
Right. I've got a
it sounds very similar to C.S. Lewis, which again,
Yeah.
Josh, we're gonna have to create a little, counter and ding here, but there is but one good, that is God. Everything else is good when it looks to Him, and bad when it turns from Him.
I love
So
that.
yeah, that's essentially what I would classify as the definition of a good or a bad ritual. Is does it bring a human? Does it bring a society? Does it bring a family? Does it bring well, for that matter, even like an inanimate space, like you were talking, Josh, about architecture and the way we order the space in which we live. If it brings things and people closer to God and reflects that divine image better and better, then it's a good ritual. And if it takes it in the opposite direction, it's the other thing.
Yeah. I to add on to that, because I think those are all wonderful. You have Jesus being asked, what is the greatest commandment? To love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is the same as the first, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So when I'm looking at anything, not just theology or ritual, anything, does this increase my love of God? Does this increase my love of neighbor? And that's, if it doesn't increase my love of neighbor, well, then it's not increasing my love for the image of God, which means it's not increasing my love of God. So if this ritual is degrading to someone, degrading to myself, because you're supposed to love yourself in that list as well, any of those, that's a ritual that's aiming away from God, because it should be increasing my love of neighbor, love of self, love of God.
This is interesting. I'm about 5 minutes before I got on here, I finished my sermon for this Sunday. And I've been preaching through Mark for 2 years, and we're at Mark 12, and we're at the love command that you just talked about. So tomorrow I'm preaching Mark 12, 28 to 34. And so I'm talking about that. It's interesting. One of the things I do in the sermon, and I've been doing as a scholarly project over the last year, is trying to nail down like a definition of love. So I don't think people know what they mean when they say love oftentimes. The other thing is, when Jesus talks about the neighbor there, who is the neighbor? He's quoting Leviticus 19, and in Leviticus 19, the neighbor is the fellow covenanter, your fellow Israelite. And as Jesus says what he does in Mark 12 there, we remember that he's in Israel, he's in Jerusalem, he's in the temple courts, he's talking to a Jewish official, he references Jewish scripture, and he engages in Jewish tradition, and he's addressing his Jewish disciples. So I think when he says his neighbor there, I think he's talking about his fellow covenanters, which leads me in the sermon to talk about, so when Jesus says love God, is love God, but love your neighbor, your fellow covenanters, which then raises a question about, well, what about everybody else? And this is where church history becomes important. We have like St. Augustine for St. Augustine, however you want to say that, this whole idea of the Ordo Amoris, in Latin, the ordered loves, right? And so one of the images that I created for the sermon is like kind of like rings on a tree that in the center you have God, in the second you have self. Augustine put self second, and I also put self and fellow covenanters, which of course in ancient context would have been the entire family. It's a little bit different today. But then outside that you have about 4 or 5 other rings, and the last ring is your enemy. And so that there actually is this sort of hierarchy of love and like what takes precedent. I don't know. So that is interesting that you brought that up, because I just literally spent all week, working on this, researching this, crafting this. But I know people would disagree with, my argument there about who the neighbor is, but I don't think it's meant to be universalized at that point. But speaking about a very specific group of people as fellow covenanters. Anyways, tangent there. Yeah.
No,
What's interesting to me is, go ahead.
I was going to say a couple open mic nights ago, we had a guy named BJ Allen come on and kind of drew the conversation into a channel that was specifically aimed at pacifism as like a moral, like
Okay.
imperative of some kind, where it was like, do no violence, turn the other cheek was the question initially. Then it kind of branched out into the larger, scope of it. And one of the things that I was kind of coming to was something very similar to the idea of the ordered loves, where it was the case where if it was my love inwardly indicative of my own value to me, I can sacrifice that. But when it comes to those whom I'm in covenant with, namely my wife, and through her, my children, I am not free to sacrifice them on the altar of inaction. I am not.
Yes.
It is immoral and illegal in my heart, and I think objectively to do so, because I am in covenant, and that illustrates the same hierarchy you were just talking about, and that was in the context of pacifism. And so I just wanted to encourage you on the continuity for that. I think
that's great. I start the sermon with this ethical scenario, because we just had this thing happen here on the island where a couple tourists came and they were drowning, and a local guy jumped in and saved them. It became a big news story. For those who don't grow up around the ocean, I think they're, for lack of better terms, very ignorant of the power of the ocean.
Oh yeah.
And you learn quickly. You never turn your back on the ocean, like these sorts of things. But for those who don't grow up around it, they don't know better. So they got saved. But I start the sermon by telling that story and then asking, so say you're at the beach and you're sitting on the shore and you see your child out in the water, and about 100 yards down, 200 yards down, you see another child, and then all of a sudden there's a rip tie, right? And they both start drowning. Who do you save? Your child or the other? Right? And the conclusion I come to at the end of the sermon is that if we're following the Ordo Amores, the ordered loves, you're in covenant with your child. You are morally and ethically obligated to save them first, So that's interesting. I'm sure we could go off on a huge tangent and talk about that, but I just thought that was fascinating, Troy, that you were invoking that, and then the connection that Josh just brought up. So,
well, actually, I do think the idea of ordered loves and disordered loves connects back to Dave's second question. Or Dale's second question.
I'll only answer the first one. I didn't answer the
which by the way, I'm a licensed professional counselor is the technical term. So that's the or something.
The or something. That's right.
That's almost more fun. That would freak people out, right? If they came to your office and it said psychologist or something.
Like in parentheses or something. I'm sure a lot of people would just kind of come there and I'm gonna keep going, keep on going. So
now I want to put a sign over my shop that says maintenance and stuff.
Right.
And stuff.
I actually think that is a really good description of mental disorders from a theological lens. Is disordered loves run amok, basically. Where, like, for example, if a person has like obsessive compulsive disorder, now obviously there's no real like love there, like, oh my gosh, I love checking, washing my hands continually, or checking the lock, or obsessing over wondering if the stove is off. And so I want to be really, really, really clear here. When I say disordered loves, I'm not talking about any kind of like moral, personal guilt or blame or anything like that. Because, and part of this is because even though I'm not Eastern Orthodox, I'm very Orthodox, capital O, Orthodox friendly, and especially with and especially with the way that I look at like the human person and God and salvation and all those other really important things. But one of the things that the Eastern Orthodox say about sin is that a primary way to describe that is as disordered affection. That being in a sinful, fallen world means that our nous is darkened, our ability to be able to see the world correctly and clearly, and to be able to see that proper order of loves and what matters most and what is most important and what is godly and what isn't. All of that is darkened and not accurate. Like we kind of like Paul says, we see through a glass darkly. And as a result of living in that world, just that state of curse, that sinful condition, we have certain things that happen to us. And it's not like, I did this thing and therefore it happened to me. I think Jesus in the Gospels explicitly rejects that when the Pharisees come up to him and say, bring him a man born blind and say, hey, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus says, neither. Like, what are you talking about? Because that whole question of I have a physical blemish, I have a I have a sickness and illness, those kind of things. It's not that I did anything wrong. It's just that I'm living in a world that is out of joint, that is out of order, that like kind of like Paul says in Romans 8 is subjected to futility. And so for all of those reasons, that was kind of a long, lengthy kind of background that I thought was really necessary to avoid, causing some spiritual trauma to people, because that certainly can be. They hear that as like, oh my gosh, I have OCD because I sinned. Absolutely not. 100% no. Having said that, though, there is a reality that there's in that person's experience of the world, certain things are given higher, what we call super salience, like higher degrees of importance. They are treated as very, very relevant on feeling like almost a survival instinct level. And so what happens is their nervous system is cued for those kinds of stimuli. And so those stimuli, even when not present, they're hyper fixated, hyper aware. And when they happen, they go, and it causes this massive reaction. And so again, there's that idea of like disordered loves is a really good way to kind of look at what mental disorder can look like. So that's that. I know that wasn't a direct answer to your question, Dale, but I think that's a good kind of background, at least for understanding an answer to your question.
Just to piggyback on what Spencer was saying, that is true. In the Orthodox tradition, it's due to being in a fallen, broken world, we just tend towards disordered passions, and it's sin is seen as an infirmity, a sickness, and that's what Jesus, as the great physician, comes to heal us of our infirmity of sin and everything. So I thought that was a really good point.
Well, yeah, and in Matthew's gospel, that's actually connected to his atonement.
Right. I agree. 100.
Yeah, where in Matthew 8, he says he quotes Isaiah 53 and says that after Jesus had healed Peter's mother-in-law and cast out demons and healed the sick, it says, and thus it was fulfilled what was said in the prophet, that he bore our infirmities and carried our diseases. And that's another reason why your sins are forgiven and pick up your mat and walk are tied together very, very often.
Such
in
a good
couple
point.
Of different, in a couple of different scriptures, is that our condition as humans is seen as disordered affections. We have caught like the sin disease, basically, and what we need is for a cleansing, an atonement, a flood of divine justice to come in and get rid of the corruption in us. So
one of the daily Orthodox prayers is a prayer of repentance, says to have mercy on me, knowing the infirmity and sickness of my soul.
Right. So I want to connect everything I said back to ritual and identity, because I think that's a really salient point there for me, at least, is that one of the things I talk with my clients an awful lot about, like how to get out of that state, because they are in that state of of a mental disorder or just a lower grade of disordered affection that is causing certain things that their experience of the world to be very subject to futility. And one of the things that I talk with them about is I try to be really concrete of like, what are the ways in which, when you encounter that stimuli, notice how your body responds. Notice the first thing that your body does, whether it's like a thump in the chest, or a panicky breathing, or the way your posture shifts, or the way your tone of voice shifts, or any of those other kind of signals. And then we start talking about how do you build a different response pattern, which is essentially how do you create a different ritual.
New ritual, yeah.
Whenever I encounter this stimuli, if I go, that affects my body. which affects my soul, which affects my spirit. And whereas if I encounter that stimuli and I go, and I have like, maybe a scripture verse to kind of remind myself over and over, or if I have some kind of grounding in some beauty in God's creation that I can, lock onto and anchor myself to. If I can do any of those things, I am creating a new ritual, again, with intention. This is not by accident. This is intentionality with a purpose, for a purpose. If I can do that, then I am aligning myself and aligning those disordered affections and those out of order loves back in line with the logos of creation, with the pattern of creation that God designed. And when I do that, I start to become more fully human, because I am now free from this state that I'm in. Now, obviously, I'm shorthanding a very lengthy, very difficult, very involved process. So I want to be really clear to anyone listening that I'm not saying, oh yeah, if you have OCD, just breathe differently and it'll go away.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the first step. That is the first step.
I hope nobody thinks that's what you're saying.
Sorry, because I work with people who have gone through spiritual trauma and religious abuse, I have a very sensitive rate of those details are super salient for me. And so I always want to make sure that I'm clarifying for people who might hear it differently that this is really important, that it has to be done in a community of faith, ideally, if not of support. It has to be done with professional help. Obviously, with your spiritual father, with your pastor would be a great place to start. With a therapist is another great place to go, and it has to be done, in a place of safety. You can't be asked to kind of push into a place of safety when you don't feel safe. It has to be a way to create safety. So
and I think by implication of what you said earlier about the thing being something that's done intentionally for a purpose, for an intended outcome, aiming at something. I think that our aimless habits are often the ones that are the most ingrained and harmful long term. And I think that has something to do with it, is that we're not aiming, like time wasted, doom scrolling, we call it now, right? Like things like that, where it's not intentional. You're not sitting there and going, I'm going to allot 3.5 hours to my phone battery. Let's do this. You don't intend that. And then here you are 3.5 hours later, and your eyes hurt and you're tired and you don't have any energy and you did nothing. And you just sat there and you're like, okay, dang it. You're disappointed. There isn't a payoff. There's nothing there. There's because there wasn't an aim, there isn't an achievement. And if there's no achievement, then there's no kickback of positive emotion in the same sense. And so instead of receiving the kickback of positive emotion by way of success or achievement or noticing a checkpoint on the way to a positive goal, right? What you have instead is the slight dopamine kick of seeing the notification on your phone, clicking it, and getting trapped there because you're waiting for it to happen again. You know what I mean? And that becomes the space. That becomes the awkward container of that ritual. Is you're stuck in that loop waiting for it to occur again because there's nothing to attach actual positive emotion to. It's just that tiny kick.
Yeah, and in those kind of cases, I mean, there is a ritual, kind of like what you're saying, Troy. It's inescapable. There is a ritual, but it's not, and there is intention, but it's not a Godward directed ritual, and it's not an intention that is coming from ourself. It is an intention that's coming from outside of us, the spiritual world around us that is exerting pressure and influence to move us further and further away from that divine telos that we are created for. And so that's one of the reasons why I consider my job to be a very sacred activity for me, because it really is doing spiritual warfare, and in a lot of different ways and a lot of different levels. But
you've been talking a lot about sort of the identifier as intentionality or unintentionality. Like, is it's a ritual if it's intentional, or it's a good ritual. and it's maybe not a ritual, it's just a routine if it's like unintentional or accidental. I think I like the intentionality aspect, and I agree with that. I think something else, though, that maybe can identify whether something is a ritual and a good ritual at that is does it lead to creativity or creating, right? Whereas a routine or a bad routine would lead to uncreating or something destructive, right? Doom scrolling, for example, it's not creative, it's wasting time, right? It's not doing something that healthy or creative or creating with the time. So I think that's another aspect of this whole ritual discussion that, at least that I find interesting and important, because I think what rituals tend to do is they shift our gears, our mental gears, like into create mode, whereas bad, unhealthy rituals shift us into destruct mode. So I don't know. Even thinking about like the root of the word ritual, and there may be some debate about this, but if you look at Greek, you have perhaps the alpha, rho, iota, theta, or tav, arit, or just even rit. And this could come from the Proto-Indo-European re, which has that root there, carries the idea of fitting together or counting, like taking stock of. So in other words, we get like our English word arithmetic from this, right? You can see the RIT there, that same root, the RI or the RIT, and it's this like fitting of things together, like bringing an account of things together, and that's what a ritual does. It creates and fits things together, where the opposite, destructs.
Right.
Yeah.
Addiction.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So then for me, the summary statement playing in my head is bad rituals are sinful. Like that's the line, right? So bad rituals are sinful. This brings a new, let's say, element to how I would view sin definitionally.
Yeah.
Right.
They take us off the beaten path of the divine,
right.
the divine intention.
It becomes something much bigger than a legal infraction, because that's just an abstraction. This is something that's actual, right? Where it's like you said, broken ritual. I feel like and this is something that's become almost like comically portrayed in movies and shows and stuff, but that moment in the confession when the person comes to a church or a Catholic church, and they go to the priest and they go to confess, and then the priest says, okay, and then listens, and then discusses and perhaps asks questions, but usually at the end gives you something to go and do about it. And we often, in our cynicism, especially in the Western world, like you said, where we have this aversion to ritual, we'll go, well, what are those things supposed to do? Is this magic?
Right.
No.
Right.
No. What you're doing is replacing the evil rituals with good ones.
Yeah.
For the displacement of that broken piece. Right? Like, this is something here. You did this thing, it fractured. We're bringing the thing together. You're in forgiveness. You've repented. You're trying to come back together. Here's something that might help to adhere the thing. Right?
Yeah.
I think that shifted into a weird direction in some places, and a lot of people I don't think are perhaps conceptualizing it that way. And so it becomes some weird, like, what Dale would have probably in mind by ritual is this kind of weird, like, I'm going to do this thing so that I feel better about it.
Right.
I think you're onto something there, Josh.
Yeah. And from a counselor standpoint, you mentioned addiction. Many people who have addiction will describe to me that they have rituals around their addictive behaviors. So like usually when I talk with people about breaking addictions, we talk about identifying that chain of behaviors and starting to intervene here rather than here. Because
Mhm.
like, for instance, if a person is trying to get rid of cigarettes, like they will have a particular ritual about which pocket they
Right.
put their cigarette packet in. They will have a certain way in which they pull
Mhm.
pull it open. They'll have a certain way in which, like, once they take it, which direction they take the cigarette out from, what they do with the
Hmm.
cigarette, like which hand they hold it in. Like, there's just a whole chain of rituals. And so we talk an awful lot, and like what you were saying, Josh, about replacement behaviors, that you don't
Yeah.
just simply say stop or no or don't. You have to replace it with a positive, a beneficial,
You
a
know,
in my opinion, Godward
Right.
activity and behavior.
right.
Sacred
One thing
authority.
I was
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We
Everybody's
were all
excited.
talking
Go
at
ahead.
the same
Yeah.
time. I think the Ordo Amoris, the ordered loves, is you could almost do like Ordo Amoris equals like Ordo Ritualium, right?
Aha.
Ordered rituals and the order
Yes.
of rituals. I think those are like one and the same thing, pretty much.
yeah.
I feel like one is a higher, like it would be the difference between body and ideation. Like one is higher than the other, because the rituals that we're talking about so far are ones that are specifically embodied. And then you're talking about taking that and making the embodied ritual into an idea, which is something
Yes.
higher. So I think even within that, there's a pecking order or hierarchy to the thing. It really like that embeds the point really well. I like that a whole lot.
There's
I wanted to go back.
interrupting each other. Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just to go back real quick to what Josh and Spencer were saying with this idea of replacement. Like in the Orthodox tradition, there's this thing of, it's talking about like the physical is good. Our passions aren't inherently in and of themselves evil. They are, they're God given, and so it's just, like we have this infirmity of sin where we tend towards disordered passions, and so what they do is that they're really big on is replacing the sinful passion with a virtue. In fact, they even have certain virtues that replace certain sinful passions and everything. And so that's what it kind of reminded me of. It's like, Josh, when you said that, it's like replacement, sort of replacing that with a more healthy alternative. Because we tend towards something, you know what I mean? So why not make it healthy? Yeah.
In my work, I work around guys that are, in addiction actively. They're trying to get clean and sober, so they come to the program, and I'm around it all the time. Right. One of the things that I reiterate all the time to these guys is the power not of saying no, but the power of your yes. Your no is very, very dependent. Right. Almost as much as your feeling of happiness is so dependent on everything else. Right. Your no is dependent on all kinds of things, but your yes can be independent of the things around you because it is attached to resolve and intention. So what I tell them is you can't simply tell yourself no and not find yourself 5 minutes later doing the stupid thing.
Right. Because you never moved away.
You have to say yes to something else that you find equally or more compelling. That's what you do.
And that's one of the that's how we start to choose replacement behaviors in the kind of work that I do, where what we start looking at is we look at that addictive behavioral outcome. Like, let's just, for instance, say it's like pornography, for example. And we say, all right, what is that trying to achieve? What is the goal behind that? What is the affection, the love that this is oriented toward? Because this is another thing from the early church fathers, that that sin is a parasite. That sin is a privation of good. The evil is a privation of good, and that it doesn't have an ontology by itself. It's not like I'm oriented toward hurting people. It's like, no, the hurting people is itself a function of something else, of something good. It's trying to, like, maybe it's about protection. Maybe it's about, I don't want to get hurt again. Like, and so that desire to protect the image of God in me or in others is itself a good thing. Now, the way it's coming out and being expressed is a very bad thing, causing lots of damage. And we have to stop that and change that. But behind that behavior is something good. Because evil cannot create, only God can. So what we try to do is try to look at, like, what is this behavior oriented toward, And then how do we replace it with the behavior that is oriented in the same direction, but is not going to cause all the damage, all the dysfunction, all the, out of order, and instead of filling with life, creating death. Like those are the two aspects of creation, essentially, putting things in order and filling them with life. And if something is not doing that, it is a ritual that causes death, addiction being an example. And if it is oriented toward putting things back in order, back in proper teleological, liturgical, cosmic order, and is filling that space with life, then it is a good ritual that will be oriented toward the exact same thing that the addictive behavior was oriented toward.
Right. In a really weird, well, not weird, perhaps interesting tangent, based kind of around what you were just saying. Somebody had sent me in the side chat another question, and what you said just kind of sparked it back into my mind. It's now relevant. He said, how do we handle it when the church's rituals are seen to be degrading to the neighbor? Remember our conversation about the disabled. I had spoken to him on Messenger on Facebook about when people who are physically or perhaps mentally disabled seem to be in some sense excluded because of the exception, the idiosyncrasy that they kind of represent. They become in some sense like background to the norm, and it's very difficult then for them to feel fully included again. And it's of no fault of their own a lot of the time that they're kind of in that physical or mental state. They're kind of just stuck there, but they said we don't realize it. And so the offense is unintentional, perhaps, right? So he's assuming that it's not somebody trying to be mean. It's just the kind of feature of the thing, and how perhaps participating in rituals. The example that we had exchanged with one another in the chat that he's referencing to was somebody who's in a wheelchair who can't get baptized because the baptismal is behind the stage up some stairs.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So as I'm thinking about that, if it's on our part, if we're legitimately doing something that would sort of exclude them, then shame on us.
Right.
Shame on us if that's the case.
I said the same. That was my immediate reaction when he had brought it up as an example. Was I feel like that's the negligence of whoever was pastoring at the time.
Sure.
Not to proactively make a situation where they could find, let's say, a river nearby that they could all go to and have a barbecue and have this person come down, and you know what I mean? Like someplace where there's a loading dock where there's, you could put your boat in the water. You could bring a wheelchair. You know what I mean? Like it just, there's lots of, I could fix that problem. It's easy to fix that problem. I promise.
Yeah.
I could fix that problem.
Just sprinkle.
There's to bring in some things that we've already mentioned before when the Pharisees asked about who sinned, the blind man or his parents, and Jesus's response is neither, right? And then you have the eunuch that meets Philip on the road, right? And he's reading Isaiah, must be wealthy because nobody has the ability to just carry Isaiah's scroll around with them, but he's not allowed in the temple, and neither was the blind man. The woman with the issue of blood was not allowed in synagogue or the temple. So you have all these people that are living on the outside of the ritual space, and Jesus makes space for them. And I think that so not to be upset at any pastor that's not intentionally doing that, but we should be paying attention. We should be making space, because that barrier for people that are not full able-bodied that you see in the Old Testament has been removed. And that is, it's serious that someone who wants to be close to Christ, like the eunuch, someone who wants to know what is going on in Isaiah, is, whether intentionally or unintentionally, being barred from it. That is not okay.
Well, what would be really interesting is if he would, obviously didn't have the chapter and verse divisions at that time, but if he would have read 3 chapters later in Isaiah 56, that's where it says that the eunuchs will be welcomed in. And so it's like there's this juxtaposition between the way things used to be, which I'm not at all going to say was bad. It was done for a purpose, and just like Paul, I'm going to say it's holy, righteous, and good. But also, what is the fulfillment of that is much greater, and that's what Jesus himself says about his relationship to the temple, for example, is that one is coming here that is greater than that, because he himself is the temple. And so there's this distinction between the way that structures are put in place in a world that is under the slavery to sin and death, where these purity regulations are going on the defensive. And then when Jesus comes in, Jesus goes on the offensive, because which is not erasing everything that came before, but it is fulfilling it and bringing it to its completion, to its telos, like Paul says in Romans 10, that Christ is the telos of the law. And so it's creating a space for the people who ordinarily were excluded, not because what happened before was wrong, but because Jesus has come and that is his mission.
Right.
That might be a good place. I just wanted to remark on the Samaritan story too, since I saw somebody commented about that. So we're talking about.
I think it was Troy.
This Troy.
Yeah.
Right here. Yeah. So
He's right here.
Yeah, I didn't know it was Troy. I think that's a great question. What about the Good Samaritan? Well, I have a couple things I'd like to say about that. The first is that it may well be the case, and this would be a challenge to a number of people, but it may well be the case that from Jesus's perspective, Samaritans were still considered part of God's covenant people from Jesus' perspective, even though from like the Pharisaical or Sadduceical point of view, they might not have been. From where Jesus stood, given how he viewed the history of Israel, I think a strong case can be made that they were still considered part of the covenant people. And in fact, throughout his ministry, Jesus goes to Samaria. He deals with various Samaritans, not just in that one Samaritan, not just in that one story, but in various stories. And so I think part of what he's doing is actually in his messianic mission.
He's expanding the level of what the covenanters are. So if you're going to go only covenanters, what Jesus is doing is going, yeah, but there's more than what you're defining as covenanters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's expanding.
Yeah, so I don't know if he's expanding it. Maybe he is, but he's saying this is what it's been all along. You all tried to close it, but this is actually what it's been all along. So maybe putting it back to how it belongs. The other thing I would say to that, if we still read that story in relation to the ordered loves, even so, it's not that we're supposed to only love our covenanter neighbors. Right. We're supposed to, even again, as I said, the last ring is enemies. We're supposed to still love them. Oh, but yeah. It's just a priority of love. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I think that Jesus does that when you come to the Syrophoenician woman, right? It's not that I take away the food from the children at the table and give it to the dogs. And her response is, yeah, but even the dogs will eat whatever falls from it. And he's like, great is your faith. And then he does it. So it's this, there are ordered loves. There is that ever expanding circles, right? Like I cannot care for someone on the other side of the world other than my prayers. Yeah. But I have family members that are suffering. Okay, I need to address that first. Yes, I totally get the ordered loves. I'm just saying that we shouldn't go, oh, I'm outside the boundary of my family. That's where my love stops. Because that's what the Pharisees were doing.
Yeah. I wasn't making that case. I hope that's clear. I wasn't making that case. I think that extends all the way out to your enemies.
Yes.
But
just hierarchy.
I don't know why, but it seems uncomfortable to people in our society that, everybody wants to like say, oh, I love everybody. Well, as you just said, that's impossible. You can't love somebody on the other side of the planet that you've never met and don't know, right? So, but it's just the ordered loves. I think people seem to be uncomfortable with that, but that I think is the scriptural way, the biblical way. It's the model. I mean, Jesus himself is doing that. Love God first, then neighbor, right? He's showing us even right there in his response that there is an order. But yeah, I hope that clarifies what I was saying.
Yeah. to me, the whole question of Good Samaritan, especially like with the question of like the Samaritan identity and covenanters, connects back directly to the question of identity. It's like, how do rituals form identity and create identity? Because the Samaritans worshipped at a different place than the Judeans did, and so their rituals looks different. We're in different places, and yet Jesus also says, despite that, they are covenanters, they are neighbors, along with us. And so it's really interesting to me how there's this kind of like double-edged sword to ritual, where it creates a community, it forms identity, it defines who belongs and who is the other,
in group out group.
But which is both necessary. Like we literally have to have a center. We have to have that one at the center, or else it just becomes complete anarchy because there is no center.
By defining the center, though, that's the thing. By defining the center, you create the margin.
Yes. You define boundaries. By defining the center, you define boundaries. And so like rituals, and actually the question of baptism and the whole question of sprinkling versus immersion, like that's an excellent case in point. Like there are certain denominational perspectives that look at this and say, this is our center. This is what we are defining as, or the minimum, these are our boundaries that we are defining as who belongs and who is the other. And so like ritual is absolutely part of the way that we form our identity as individuals. What's familiar to me, what's familiar and what's other to me, what makes sense and what doesn't. As a collective, like what's familiar to us and what other people who we kind of put on the margins and exclude. But it absolutely is inescapable, just like all ritual is.
We haven't talked much about beauty.
I was actually about to go there. I was going to say, you just made a perfect segue. You just made a perfect segue, because what you did was say how we receive identity from ritual, but we also express identity through ritual. And those are done by the most important events that we demarcate with ritual in our lives. And those most important events are always made beautiful, intentionally made beautiful. The expectation of the birth of a child. We do a baby shower or a christening or a dedication unto the Lord, or even in the secular world, you used to have baby showers, right? It's like you have let's say a rite of passage for basically every culture around the world. A woman becomes a woman and not a girl anymore at some event, and it's demarcated by something, a quinceañera or whatever. There's going to be something. Right. In the Jewish culture, it was the bar mitzvah, where you become a son of the law. And it was this demarcation between the youth and the man. Right. And there was this event that made it happen. And it was attached
or like a father giving his daughter away, walking
right, exactly. A betrothal. You have a betrothal ceremony, but then you also have the wedding, which is made beautiful. Right. You have also a funeral, which is often made beautiful, ritualized. The Vikings come to mind. Like it's this universal event, right? Where we see these events that are happening with the birth of a child or the death of someone, right? And those opposite poles. And we see the beauty and promise of one and the melancholy of the other, but we still mark them with something of reverence and beauty. Right. And I think it's like that mark of universality in both of those cases, because in both cases, do you get things like shrines, altars, dedications, poetry, arts and sculpture,
music,
just like everything that's attached to this is attached to the main events that we use to express identity. And I think that's where we understand our intent to bring beauty in or out of those things becomes so prominent, is because we recognize those things as that deeply meaningful thing that we're swimming in. We want to make it distinct. We want to bring the past into the future with us. And so we build an altar.
Right.
Yeah.
Philosophy, in philosophy, I'm sorry, I'm having a really bad lag here.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. I was going to say in philosophy, beauty is often seen as a subset of value. You know how there are certain things that are considered valuable, meaningful, and everything, and beauty is considered a subset of that deeper, axiological notion there.
Yeah. And because it has a place. Like, and here's the thing too,
Yeah.
is like if you made beauty or beautifying something out of order in its place and you begin to sacrifice things to it that are inordinate, you can ruin the world while trying to make it beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Your own world for sure, if not, the larger world.
Right. And I think there's a cynicism that's attached to this also that we can draw back from earlier, that's kind of resistance to ritual, that kind of makes us look, and I've heard this argument 1,000 times and made it myself before I ever really considered this any further, is this kind of cynicism against making something beautiful for the Lord, like a cathedral, like a space, like the vesture, like all of these things that used to be something that was along with the ritual, a demarcation of things, and everything had its place and purpose because it was symbolic in the sense that it draws things together.
Yeah.
Right. Like you had said, Michael, the rituals build things together. Right. And so this thing that we're doing also with the beauty is drawing out of ourselves this, I guess, the more what we would call the more spiritual experience side of it, which I think is what you're talking about, Travis, is because I know that you would make much about spiritual experience because it's something that is where, like you said, the noose is touching something, right? That's part of you that's remaking your mind, and the mind being the containment, right? Not just what you're thinking, not the thought needs to be reformed. The place, the screen of your mind that the thought is displayed on needs to be redone.
And like in Saint Maximus' thought, beauty, like the beauty in nature and the beauty in creation. In fact, this is really interesting. It was seen as sort of an icon of God's beauty. It represented an image of the beauty of God. And he had this really profound notion that we have a way of giving and receiving, like kind of like gift giving with God. Is that when we contemplate the beauty in nature,
sacrifices.
It's like a way of. It's like a way of. It's in a sense we're giving the gift back to God. It's like we're giving him, reverencing creation. I lose track of the exact way he puts it, but it's a sense of like, that awe we have of the beauty of creation and everything. That's a way of giving us a gift, like appreciating his gift and then returning the gift to him. So it's like a mutual gift exchange with God in some kind of way.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely proper because, like, I mean, to me, whenever we have like a ritual experience like that, it's like heaven coming down to earth. It really is like, it's that liminal space where heaven and earth connect, whether it's like in a building, like in a very beautiful building that is, the tabernacle itself was patterned after Eden. And then the Eastern Orthodox churches, as well as like the Roman Catholic churches for that matter, are also patterned after the same, kind of architectural style. And so there's this like liminal space within ritual existence. Yes, that as well. Yeah, you're right, because it had layers and levels of it was almost like a mini cosmos, in there. Yeah, and so it's this place where like Chronos time and Kairos time come together, where like our experience of being in the world, in the temporal reality, that's the Chronos time, connects to the eternal reality, that's the Kairos time. And so like in that space we experienced, through our Chronos experience, a Kairos reality. We experience the eternal kind of like existence through our rituals, which is one of the reasons why Jewish people still today, but also in the time of Jesus, when they would go through the Passover ritual, they would say, this is the day that we were redeemed. And so it's not this sense of like, oh yeah, this happened long time ago down the timeline to our forefathers. It is that. It's not that, but it's not only that. It's that where that combines and brings and almost is like the eternal, the Kairos reality breaking in to the Chronos reality.
Yes, it's tying them to the genesis of their nation. So every generation who participates in this is the generation that is freed from Egypt. That's why
Which
Eucharist and
yep.
Passover, or Pascha, Easter, is so important
Yep.
to us, is that recognizing we are participating in the resurrection, the conquering of death, and every generation that participates in that is the generation that witnessed Christ resurrect from the dead.
Absolutely. And that connects directly back to what you started with, Travis, at the very beginning of the episode, with St. Maximus talking about how it unites people across time and space.
Oh, right,
That's exactly what ritual does.
That's exactly
is
right.
It's like we are standing here in this place in 20th century or 21st century America, and we are totally removed from first century Judaism, but we are saying the same things. We are saying the same prayers, singing the same songs. I mean, if our liturgy is structured in that way, at least. But it's a way of multiple people across time and space sharing identity together.
Right. That communal, kind of like Eucharistic ontology we have.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually the most excellent way to describe it. That's absolutely it. Yes.
Thanksgiving. Yes, that's what
I think too. Like as we talk about the Ordo Amoris and like God is the center and the Ordo Ritialum, for example, you have this. I wonder, one, is there an ideal? We talked about like a good ritual. So an ideal ritual is one that points to God. I think I would say the same for beauty. That ideal beauty is a beauty that points to God, and perhaps beauty is at its best when it's pointing to God, but has a ritual element that's also pointing to God. And ritual is at its best when it's pointing to God and has that beauty element that's also pointing to God. I love the Greek word avtokalon, and that means ideal beauty. That's a cool word, avtokalon. But yeah, I think like an ideal ritual and ideal beauty, and those intersect with the ideal love. But yeah, I don't know.
That reminds me of like the contrast between male and female, right? Where you have the ritual being the embodied and the beauty being the more spiritual portion, right? And you have this like the difference between land and water, you know what I mean? Where ritual is something where I can stand, but beauty is something that is for the other. I'm not meant to worship my beauty,
Right.
but when others notice it, it can be venerated. It's good. It's not bad when somebody else notices that my wife is beautiful. I notice it also, right? It would be bad if my wife noticed how beautiful she is and began to fixate on that. That would create vanity, right? But for her to allow her beauty to be for another is what makes it ordinately good in those cases. And I think that's the same thing for our rituals. They're ordinately good and beautiful because of the other, and it's good ritual because it is for me, right? And so the inward and outward as well, the us and the them, right? Because you also have the outside of the cathedral is not undecorated. The inside is beautiful, and it's more beautiful than the outside, but the outside is not undone, right? And so you have this kind of inward and outward, all of the sides of the thing, right? And so you would have the ritual hits the inner part of me, the beauty expresses outwardly that inward thing, right? And I think that's where, if we like you pointed out, Spencer, that this temporal time and eternal time are touching in a couple of times during what we call the present, right? We experience it. No wonder your emotions would be attached to it, because your emotions don't know about time. And so we get concerned, I think, and this is part of probably why Dale asked his question. It's a great question. Everything keeps to attaching to it. It's got lots of tentacles. Good question, Dale. The way that emotion is brought into these things and experienced so deeply, there's the concern that the attachment of certain things to these rituals makes them, let's say, manipulative, right? And I think that could be what is in mind for a lot of people when they hear the word ritual, right? They think of something that has to be by definition foreign, or something that has to like try to grab at you and manipulate you. A lot of us in the Protestant world kind of, I grew up Baptist, and so it wasn't the biggest picture in the world in my head of people who went to charismatic churches, right? And then as a grown-up, I hear about the worship songs that are coming out of charismatic churches. I listen to them, and they're very touching. And it's like, but they're very repetitive, and it's kind of interesting because it's the same motif musically. I happen to be a musician, so I can kind of detect some of this stuff, but it's the same motif musically as a romance or love song. Right. And so if you replace oh baby with my lord, you have virtually the same texture happening, and the same emotive swells come with the same portions of the music. It can be manipulative, but if it's aimed at something that's drawing you away, I think you get again the same obviousness of sinful or ordinate. It's not that music is something wrong, or that when rituals are touching or deep and meaningful and impactful and just mark your mind with the remembrance of the thing, right? That, 20 years later, you remember it as though it were yesterday. There's not a lot of memories that you have that are like that. They're attached to something, and it's like when we do that and we make the memory beautiful, like you said, Spencer, you can kind of choose the reaction to the thing and rebuild a new thing with it. Right. And in so doing, you almost change the past, by the way. It's like a superpower to do this on purpose.
It really is.
It's really something else. And the fact that it becomes volitional and gives some of the power back to the person, that they're not just riding back seat to whatever's happening to and around them. Because I think that also ties into the addiction problem, is you get stuck in this, like, I guess this is how things are now cycle. And then you don't fight back. You don't. But you don't do it like you. It's just weird because people that sleep on the street will tell me, I don't know if I'm ready to go inside. It's like, when are you going to be tired of this, bro? You look tired, like come outside of it. Really, like you're stuck in there. I can see you're stuck in there. Take my hand and you offer the thing, or you try to, you know what I mean? But there are people that are just stuck in here because they don't have that aim. They don't have that push outward. They haven't been drawn by anything hard enough to overcome the thing. You know what I mean? It's like when you hand them that power back, it's like it's a superpower. I feel like it is.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So I was raising my hand a second ago because it's so funny you talk, or not really funny, but very apropos that you talk about like re-inhabiting and changing the past. So my specialty that I work with is trauma. And yes, I do kind of have like subspecialty in religious and spiritual trauma, but I work a lot with veterans and active duty military and people and women who have undergone sexual trauma and, lots of other, lots of other traumatic experiences and situations. And one of the ways in which we work at helping them to recover from that is bringing compassion, curiosity, and like that sense of like calm, caring self into the past experience. And so there's a type of therapy I use called IFS that does this an awful lot, where it's like one of the exercises we use is a exercise called reparenting, where it's like the person now who is wiser, who is stronger, who is able to say no, who is able to fight back, can go back into that past time and space in their imagination and in the safe place of the counseling room, and be able to create a new, almost like a new memory. It's not like rewriting the past as if it never happened. It's not that at all, but it is bringing, I would argue, the light and love of God into the darkness.
Yeah,
and when the light shines in the darkness is not overcome it.
Let me make sure I understand it. It's changing your relationship to that event, right? So because you're changing the relationship to the event and bringing the person who is here today, that person back to that event and going, all right, how do you process that down today? You're changing that event because it's not a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old going through that trauma. It's the 52-year-old or the 40-year-old and going, all right, now change the relationship to that event. You've changed that event. None of the facts changed, but the event has.
And because Peter Levine, who's a major trauma figure, a major figure in the trauma world, one of the things he says about trauma is that it is a disorder of not being able to be in the here and now. which is what a lot
Yeah.
of my clients tell me, is that like they feel stuck in the past, that the traumatic event, whatever it was, has so become to define them. There's our question of identity now, that like they have ritually participated in that event over and over and over and over and over and over again through 1,000 different, little ways, such that they, the way they inhabit their body is defined, their identity is defined by that past experience, to the extent to which when they are triggered by some kind of external stimuli that reminds them or cues their brain about that trauma, they inhabit that 6-year-old body. And I've seen that happen in real time. And so and even though they're actually 60, and I'm thinking of a very specific client right now in my head. And that is what happens in that moment, is that like that the past becomes real in the present. And what the healing process looks like is the reverse, making the present become real in the past. And I think that very much is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he talks about participating in his death and resurrection.
I was going to say that is the actual, I think the equal opposite to what you're talking about is actually to participate in a past event in right now, as though that event were right now, right? Which is to share.
There's a good Greek word for that. There's a good Greek word for that. Literally, like for the anamnesis, you are bringing the past forward into right now and reshaping it.
Right. That's cool.
That's where we get our word amnesia from. Yes.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. No, that's an interesting. I didn't realize that's such a pun. That's hilarious. So that I think that's cool, because if you take the overcoming trauma by changing your relationship to the past can change your relationship to right now. Also, if you're doing it like this is what we like. It's the baptism becomes something like a wedding ceremony to God and his people. Which is why it is beautiful. Water in and of itself is beautiful. Like it is one of those things, which is why you wouldn't baptize somebody in stagnant mosquito water. You wouldn't do that. It would be weird and it would break the ritual. You want clean, living, running water if possible, right? You would go to a place where there was moving water, because water moves from high to low. It's coming from on high. It is living water. It's moving water. The living thing is not the stuff in the water, which is what stagnant water does. It becomes alive in the wrong way, right? And so you have this water that's moving, and trees flourish with this and everything else. We can see nature making it obvious to us that that's the right thing, right? So it's like you can see how all of this stuff, like Travis was saying initially, is like tied to why it is that we are the way that we are, being a microcosm or a like an amalgamation of the earth, the matter, the reality things, and the meta reality things, the ideation, the spiritual, the love, the charity, all of those things that aren't physical but have body through us, right? Those are the things when we put those things and we experience that meaning, the attachment of those two things. I think that's what we mark with ritual. When we get down to it, is the moments, because like you said, if you have brushing your teeth isn't one of these moments unless it's attached to something like my spouse and I do it together. And now it's one of these things, right? Now it can be one of those things because it's tied to something that's intrinsically meaningful and fulfilling, or something that in the opposite end, let's say if you're not doing rituals with your spouse and you're disconnected, it manifests that lack that I was talking about earlier. And then it's still one or the other. You're having the experience of meaning, right? Like the way that you can't deny pain, you know what I mean? Like the pain shouts at you, you're not going to rationalize it away, there's things that kind of like call out to you that way. But the beautiful is something
like C.S. Lewis said,
as well.
God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Yep.
Right. Exactly. Pain's the megaphone. I feel like beauty is the fireworks. Like it commands in both directions. It's terrifying. Also, it can be. To see something that's genuinely beautiful and overwhelming. It can be terrifying, you know, like seeing the world from the top of a mountain and having a momentary taste of something like omniscience and just seeing everything, and it's too much, you know, it just is. And if you're like let's say an easily moved person, that's something that'll make you cry because it's overwhelming. You know what I mean? Perhaps I was blessed with an excess of emotions, but I actually happen to enjoy having experiences like that because there's something that for me marks something out. You know what I mean? And begins to give me a different glimpse of the nature of reality around me and how what I see is very dependent upon where I stand. And so I can relay this to myself from the profane or mundane back into the sacred and make it a principle, make it attached to the spirit of something, right? And say my mountaintop experience or my valley experience, and not even literally speaking anymore, standing on top of a rock, but instead standing on top of a great experience like the day I got married or the day my children were born. You know what I mean? And those things where I'm standing on top of the world. And I feel like I wrote something that was really interesting. Like when my daughter was born, I was holding her. I was like, the world has shrunk. I have the whole world in my hands. Like it's right here. I can see it. You don't understand. All of you are blind. I have the whole world right here. You know what I mean? And I'm sitting there and I'm just crying because I can't, I'm overcome. And it's like, this is the same thing as the top of Everest right now to me. This is the same thing. There is nothing else to achieve. This is satisfaction. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean when I see people post a picture of their newborn. I say, that's the meaning of life. This is what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the key features of ritual, as far as I can tell, is like it's this kind of juxtaposition and incongruity of like the mundane and the awful, as you were saying, Troy. Like
right.
So it's like the body and the blood become the eternal and self-existent logos in creation.
Right.
Like the bread and the wine become, the body and blood of the eternal and self-existent logos in creation. The idea that like even little moments, like there's this tiny little creature who is totally helpless and can do absolutely nothing without me, and yet
she contains the world.
Oh my gosh, like that description resonates so much with me. I mean, like I remember when my daughter was born, I had an experience where like I was totally focused on my wife. I was, trying to be there for her, help her. And I wasn't even watching what was happening. And it just completely out of my field of vision, I hear my daughter cry for the first time. Just like as she came out, it was just, and I have never in my life had just an emotion take me over like I had in that moment. Like it spontaneously flood of tears, and it was exactly because it's that like I think my noose recognized this is what I was made for. This is what humans were made for. This is the pattern of creation in its most purest, most distilled, most sharpest form. Yes. And that beauty just like wrecked me in that second.
My wife used to use this term kind of often, brutiful. You guys familiar with that? I think it's a really good term, right? Brutiful. That even in these like wrecking moments, there's, it's the beauty in the midst of the hardship that's kind of doing the wrecking as well as maybe as much as the hardship that's doing the wrecking. But brutiful, that word's always just stuck with me. I do. This year I started trying something new. I've ventured into the world of stand-up comedy, and so I've done 3 shows.
Great
I just had my 3rd show a couple of weeks ago, and nice. It's really fun. I love it. It's really, for me, a creative act. But you used the word a moment ago, Spencer, incongruity, and of course, like what makes a joke work all the time, pretty much all the time, if not all the time, is incongruity. Like that.
Yes.
That's what makes us laugh, right? You're taking one idea and then you're going to typically go a completely different direction there's an incongruity, or you have one idea and another idea, and you find the nexus, like the fulcrum point to bring them together, and then we get this beautiful thing out of it called laughter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I don't know, I just think that's fascinating. I've really been working on writing jokes, right? That's a hard thing to do. You know, most of us are like, when we're just talking to other people, we most of us have a good sense of humor. We can laugh and connect, and we can immediately create inside jokes, as you were talking about earlier. And the trick with stand-up comedy is you find yourself in a room full of strangers, and you're trying to create or find the inside jokes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like the tricky part of it, but it's the most beautiful thing when it works.
Yeah.
Right.
No, and that was exactly the language I was talking about earlier, about like creating a relational culture. So it's like in that room, there's a culture created because everybody is going through the same rituals. Because most every comedy, I mean, I don't know a lot, but I would imagine like most every comedy club is more or less the same. You know, like you get there, you pay your entrance fee or you pay the cover charge, and then you have some drinks and you sit down with your friends and you and there's, and I've gone to a few myself, and so like there's usually like an opening act, and then and maybe
there's
a
a liturgy. There's a liturgy.
Exactly. There's exactly a liturgy. And that ritual and that process is what bonds everybody together. And I've seen this several times at some of the comedy clubs where I go to, where like the main event person will start to reference the people who, the jokes or the
callbacks,
to kind of bring back something. From the opening acts. And so it becomes this like, oh, because you heard them, like you were here. And it's like that creates identity. And it's like, that's one of those things that like I haven't done it myself, but I would imagine that someone who's done it could just feed off of on the stage and be like,
absolutely.
Yeah, all right, this is we are sharing an experience right now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the whole liturgy of that's fascinating to me. I was thinking too earlier, airplanes. I'm like going off on all these disparate things, right? Like comedy and but airplanes. There's a whole liturgy to that.
Planes, trains, and automobiles.
you get onto the airplane, and there's a whole liturgy. And it used to be, for those of us who are old enough to remember, and some of the smaller planes, they still do it. The steward or the stewardess is up there with a belt buckle teaching, and then a mask. But now what they've done is they've tried to beautify the liturgy. You go on Delta, they have a unique video that they've created. And, it's this kind of artistic thing, and you go on United and they have their own. It's really interesting to me how they've tried to beautify that ritual of preparing for the takeoff. Yeah. So I think this is all over the place. Where we're trying to create ritual and beautify it, and people don't realize it. Yeah.
Right.
And as we said before, like, really it is religious in nature, at the heart of it.
Yeah, but it's central to who we are as a culture, who we are as a family, who we are as individuals. It's absolutely inescapable and critical.
Yeah.
Man, this was great. Huh? I am pleased.
And after this, you still have all your fingers, so that's good.
I do. I didn't lose any
callback. See that callback there? Inside joke. We just made a relational community.
Boom. There we go. Oh, and here's BJ Allen. We referenced you earlier in the show, bro. So you have to go back and listen. There's an Easter egg hidden just for you, my friend. That was cool. Anybody who's still listening right now, do me a second. Take a second to hit the like button, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. We try to do things that are a blessing to you. We have a lot of different ministries on here, quite a few different shows, lots of different topics, lots of things to engage with. And I hope if you like what you're hearing here, you should check out my playlist. If you go to our homepage on Faith Unaltered and click the Cosmic Corner playlist on the playlist tab, You can see all of the past episodes and discussions there. This has been really fantastic. I feel like I don't even feel weird about a point of closure. We all just ended with, yeah, that was fantastic. It was just,
Yeah.
this has been a real blessing. And I thank you also to Travis, who's not here anymore. He had to get off for personal reasons. And so thank you again, Travis. You're a remarkable blessing. Thank you for the opening with the reading about Saint Maximus. That was fantastic.
Yes.
I'm just so blessed right now. This is always surreal to me to be able to do this. I love it. But do you guys have any closing thoughts as we go around, Spencer?
Not right now.
Okay.
I'll raise my hand if I do.
Right on. How about you, Michael? What did you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation to come on, and it's a fascinating subject. And yeah, thanks. Nice meeting you, Spencer. Nice meeting you, Troy, and Travis when he was here. So yeah,
fantastic. Twin.
Well, I've got a little idea that might thread through the whole discussion when it comes to the Eucharist or communion, right? This ritual that builds relationship, and it's that gift-giving ritual that was kind of mentioned by both Spencer and Travis. Is I'm speaking from my church specifically. We brew the wine. So we take the grapes that God provides, and we take the grain that God provides, and we turn it into wine and bread. And then we offer it to God. And then there's the moment in liturgy where we're asking God, hey, take these mundane and make them something holy for your purpose. And then that gets offered back to us as the body and blood, as Jesus puts it. And then once that's complete, that's not where that liturgical pattern stops, because right after church service is a meal that I share with everyone else, where we bring food and we bring drinks and we bring life and share it together. And then that's not where that pattern stops, because the next day I have coworkers, and the next day I have extended family members and friends and the people that I interact with. And it's like, oh, this is why going back every Sunday or every service that it's offered and seeing the pattern of God gave me grain and provided something for me. I turned it around and offer it to him. He turns it into something holy and gives it back to me. And then I turn it around and give it to someone else. And it's this pattern of gift giving. And it's beautiful because I can see when I step off that pattern when I'm not loving, or I'm not serving, or I'm not operating in agape. And it's wonderful because I get that pattern repeated to me every service, every Sunday, and go, oh, I'm learning to dance in this pattern. Go ahead, Spencer, there's your hand.
No, I want to make sure that you finish up because this is beautiful stuff.
I was running out of that idea anyway. So,
well, that's fine, and I think like yes, I agree, Garrett, and that's the reason why I raised my hand, because it cued something for me about like connecting your experience of the divine liturgy to my experience in counseling. Yes. Where I know like Aristotle has said that we are what we repeatedly do. And that feels to me exactly like what you just described. Like by doing it over and over and over, by continually doing the same thing that connects across time and space to all these different, cultural traditions of believers and followers in Christ, that you are shaping yourself into a certain kind of person that fits, that is proper to that community of faith across time and space. And I encounter this very often with my clients where like I'm suggesting to them a different way of being. I'm saying like, well, what if you tried responding this way? What if you did it this other different way? And their response is invariably at the outset something like, that's just not me. That's not who I am. That's not who I feel like it fits with me. And I mean, I always, provide space for that because I don't want to, impose my own value system onto my clients, but I'm always suggesting them and then gently encouraging them and saying, well, what if you could be something different? What if you could be something else? What if your life wouldn't have to be ruled by this addiction? What if your life wouldn't have to be ruled by this mental disorder? What if your life wouldn't have to be ruled by this conflict that you feel like you have over and over with your family, with your spouse, with whatever? What if you could live a different kind of life? What would that be like? And so, like, we in counseling, we actually call it the miracle question of, like, if you woke up tomorrow and a miracle happened and the thing that used to be define you no longer does, how would it change the way you get out of bed? How would it change the way you walk? How would it change the way you breathe? How would it change what you say to your family? How would it change what is the first thing that you would do in the morning? All those kind of things. Like, those are all rituals that it changes when our context changes. But the power of ritual is that it works in the other direction as well. Because, like, I talk with clients an awful lot about, like, it's like, okay, that's not me. Well, yes, but we are what we repeatedly do. Part of the reason why you are where you're at is because of what you've repeatedly done. So what if we repeatedly do something different? What if we create a different ritual way of inhabiting the world? And that creates a different identity. And that is what it looks like to kind of be freed from, that slavery to whatever may be enslaving us.
Amen. Repent and believe.
Mm-hmm.
Be baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Man, if this has blessed you, please be a blessing and leave a comment. Let us know what you think. I am so happy right now. This was fantastic. Again, thank you guys for coming on. I don't really have much more to say, which is surprising because I usually have loads of things to say. And so thanks for taking my breath away, fellas. This has been fantastic. And I'm blessed. I really am. Good night. God bless. Stay like Christ.